Hello, everybody. Happy Friday afternoon to you. You know, Emma pointed out that I was way behind in answering questions from friends about a variety of topics. And since my wife left to go shopping or something, I figured this was a good time to jump in and answer a few of these questions. So I hope you all are doing well. So here's the first question. I guess this was a leftover one from the last time I did a live, which was in June. And the question was, what would I suggest or recommend or advise for my kids for their jobs or for their future? And there's a lot to unpack there. But what I do with my children is I try to tailor their jobs and their training to their personality, their strengths and weaknesses, and what I anticipate their vocations might be. Now, in the case of our boys, we kind of have the default position that their vocation would be as a priest, the idea of giving God your first fruits. Now, that doesn't mean that they all have that vocation, but kind of default into that position until they reach the conclusion that they definitely don't have a vocation as a priest. And so we kind of call that plan B. And so in the case of some of my sons who were more interested in working with their hands, having a hands-on kind of job, maybe working in construction or maybe working in carpentry and so forth, we have tailored their work and their hobbies and their jobs, even around the house and so forth, to to that kind of an environment. And so when you have a kid that maybe you have a sense of what their strengths and weaknesses are and so forth, then that's naturally what you're going to do, in my opinion. If you have a kid who's got great musical talent or he loves being outdoors or whatever, then I'm going to build their jobs and responsibilities around that. If you have kids like one of my sons, loves working in the kitchen. He's great with food and recipes. He might be a chef one day. So we've kind of shifted responsibilities there. So he cooks more often than some of the other kids do. I do try to make sure that all of the kids have a very strong foundation in critical thinking skills, that they know how to advance an assertion. They know how to defend it logically. They know how to break down arguments that they hear. They know how to defend their faith and defend their value system and so forth. That's important for all of them, whether they're going to be an electrician or a priest or a carpenter or an attorney, right? So that's kind of what we try and do. There's a baseline for everybody, heavily rooted in the liberal arts, critical thinking skills, communication, strong emotional quotient. That's very important. And then build their jobs around that. Do I recommend manual or practical jobs versus intellectual or virtual ones? Well, I think they're both important in 2020. So especially with teenage boys, you want them to be working hard. You want them to have a lot of physical activity that's good for them in many ways. And working outside, working in the garden, working with animals, whether it's fish, rabbits, chickens, quail. I want all of them to have some experience with that. But at the same time, not everybody's the same. And some kids like to do computer work and some like to do indoor work. Some like to work with food. Some are more inclined to handle babies. Some want to be outside cutting the grass. So to some extent, I want them to be well-rounded. At the same time, we're all different and the division of labor is important. And so I do try to give them the opportunity to pick and choose what they like to have. Now, I still have 11 kids at home. When you've got that many people, then it's really easy to divide up the labor, divide up the responsibilities, and let people kind of do what they prefer to do. Not everybody's home is going to be like that, right? So you may only have 2 or 3 or 4 kids. They're going to have to do a lot of those jobs, regardless of whether or not they like them. And that's important, right? Everybody needs to know how to wash their laundry and do dishes and cook a few basic meals and that sort of thing. So I hope that helps you answer that question of what our family does, what the approach is for that. The next question was, my boyfriend slash fiance plays video games all the time and he won't get a job, what should I say to him? I would give him an ultimatum. If you're, I don't have a lot of context here, but let's say you're a young 20-something and you've got a boyfriend, one of these guys who probably lives with his mom and plays video games all the time, doesn't want to work, doesn't want to develop the skills to work, doesn't want to get a job because that'll interfere with his video games. Just give him an ultimatum. Save yourself a lifetime of disappointment and frustration and misery and many moral conflicts. Just give him an ultimatum. And if he can't choose you in an instant, he's already made the decision for you. Don't waste your time. These guys are a scourge on our society. They're weak, young, indulgent, effeminate men whose lives consist in a delusional, virtual reality. And no decent young woman should waste their time on them. Of course, the mother that's enabling this situation is culpable for what she's created. She's created this this situation. She enables him, and sinfully so. She's going to be culpable for all that. So, terrible situation. Don't waste your time. Okay, here's a question I've gotten repeatedly by email and private message. What do you think about putting together a sort of security group or a loose network of people who are going to provide security for their local parish? And this has been brought about, of course, by all the attacks on people by protesters and by the violence against Catholic churches and parishes and that sort of thing. I'm supportive of the idea. I mean, it sounds good. Let's go defend our parish. But I think in practice, it's a no-go. First of all, most of your pastors don't want you to do that. They don't want you on the premises. They certainly don't want you to be armed. The last thing they want is for you to engage in some sort of violence in order to protect statues, churches, even the Blessed Sacrament. That's not what they want. I have been told directly in no uncertain terms by several priests that they don't even want parishioners to be armed. And if they find out somebody is, they're going to ask them to leave. I think that gives you some insight into what their mentality is, right or wrong. They have no interest in protecting the church, the statue, and so forth. They're probably stuck in a different mindset, an older age, whatever the case may be. So I think that's the number one problem. Pastors don't want the lay faithful doing this. This is not 1910 Mexico, right? This is not 1790 in France. It's a different age altogether. So I just don't think that they're going to want them. The bishops certainly don't want you on parish property, right? And what's going to happen? You're going to hear about a Black Lives Matter protest. And they're threatening churches or whatever, and you're going to get your weapons and some friends, and you're going to go to the parish, and you're going to stand guard around the parish property. Somebody's going to try and do something. You're going to use what you think is proportionate violence to stop that. Somebody's going to get hurt or killed. You know what's going to happen? The diocese is not going to defend you. They're going to condemn you. The prosecutor will indict you for a crime of violence. They will not take up charges against the protesters, in part because the diocese won't press charges. And you're going to find yourself on trial, possibly for your life, because what? You wanted to defend a statue of Our Lady when the pastor and the bishop won't defend it. I just think that's a no-win situation. So I think the prudence calls here in this situation to defend your home, to defend your family, defend your business. I think you'll have a stronger case, and you won't get thrown under the bus by the diocese, because I think that's inevitable. Okay. What does it look like in practice for a man to uphold every woman's dignity, and vice versa? I would say that a let's talk about it from the standpoint of the husband and father. I think it's the Proverbs that are referring to, maybe a week ago, the Proverbs were referring, in the old calendar, were referring to the how special a woman is who loves the Lord, who, is pleasing to him, who, works relentlessly, who keeps a good household, all these sorts of things. And Solomon is talking about her, how wonderful she is. I think it's Proverbs. Anyway, the point is that this kind of a woman is a rare thing, and she's a pearl of inestimable wonder. Well, the husband, the father, should be treating her in that way at all times. In fact, I would take it to another step. A husband should remind himself that his wife is a daughter of the king, the greatest king that there ever was or ever will be. She is supernaturally a daughter of that king, sacramentally so through baptism and so forth. So I think that husband has to maintain that context and say to himself, if she were the daughter of a king, how might I be expected to treat her? How might I be expected to refer to her? What would my responsibilities be to protect her and guide her and encourage her, to correct her if necessary? So I think thinking within that context, that she's a princess, the daughter of a king, and her dignity would be appropriate to her station, which, if you follow the thinking here, would be unparalleled. How would you act, right? We could all men could probably imagine, well, what if I was going to marry the daughter of the King of England, right? Or, God forbid, the daughter of the President of the United States. You kind of would be in a situation where you'd probably think a little bit more seriously about your responsibilities than just the typical guy getting married to, his girlfriend. I think that's the right way to start, to think about it. And then that will probably answer all of the questions. How he refers to her in his words, how he encourages her to conduct herself, right? Consistent with her state in life as the daughter of a king. What sort of behavior he would tolerate and not tolerate from his own children. If those children are not treating her appropriate to her station in life, then immediately the husband has to correct that. And of course, this would carry on with relationships with, people that you come into contact with, your friends, other family members who, because of that familiarity, they're going to be more inclined to contempt. The husband's job would be to defend her, even from her own siblings or her own parents, if they're mistreating her, if they're not recognizing her dignity. So I know that's kind of a long-winded, more of a philosophical answer, but that's the best one that I've got. Of course, in a very practical stance, it means he is praying for her. He is fasting for her. He is making sacrifices of himself for her. My dad told me a great thing one time before I got married. I got married young. My wife and I were high school sweethearts. It was a very difficult situation. Her parents were adamantly opposed to the relationship then, as they are now, 26 years later. And my dad was giving me some last-minute marriage advice, and he said, if you focus on taking care of her at all times and making her the most important thing in your life, and if she does the same, then you'll have problems, but you'll always be able to overcome them, and you'll have a good, strong marriage. I think that was pretty simple advice, but very profound and certainly true. Anytime you have two sinners come together, there's an endless possibility of trouble. And even under the best of circumstances, right, we can simply misunderstand things. And so even where the intentions are good, it's easy to get in trouble. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. All right. What's the next question here? What did you say about canon law and masks? Okay. A while back, I think I posted something about how bishops who require people to wear a mask to receive the sacraments, to come to Mass, for example, to receive communion, they are in violation of canon law. And the canon in question is Canon 9:12. And it says that no one may be denied communion unless they are prohibited from receiving communion by the law. And what that means by the law is it means you've been excommunicated, or your pastor has told you may not receive communion because you're a public sinner, right? Like Nancy Pelosi or somebody like that. So unless you're prohibited from receiving communion by law, you cannot be denied communion. It seems to me a very clear prima facie objective violation of this law for a bishop, let alone a parish priest, to say you can't receive communion unless you come into the church wearing a mask. Why is that a problem? Well, ask yourself this. What if your priest said you cannot receive communion if you are black? What if your priest said you cannot receive communion because you're a Republican? Would you accept that? Would you say, as one canon lawyer told me, that the bishop can do whatever he wants? Actually, what a canon lawyer told me. Can he deny you communion because you are a white male? Now, I think hopefully you all would answer that no, the bishop does not have that competency, meaning he does not have that right in canon law. Remember that he is a servant of canon law, just as much as he is a servant of you, the faithful. That is why he has been consecrated. Our Lord was explicit about that, right? In his last act with his bishops, he, before the Last Supper, washed their feet. That's how important it was to him to demonstrate that they were first and foremost servants, and that he was going to give them that final example. So when they act not as servants of the people but as princes, and they use the law to abuse you, you are right, of course, to resist and certainly to correct them. Now that correction will almost certainly come to nothing, and you may be persecuted for it. But the law is clear, right? You can't be denied the sacraments without cause, and the cause has to be a legal one. So there needs to have been a legal process by which you have been determined by a competent court that you may not receive communion. So now you're not, like I said, you're not going to get establishment people to agree with you on that, because they don't care about the spirit of the law. They don't care about the good of souls. They're positivists, right? They care about the letter of the law. And of course, our Lord spoke to that as well, right? When he talked about the Pharisees' love of the law, it was not because that the law was ordered to the good of souls, and that's why they cared about it. They cared about being seen to obey the letter of the law. They cared nothing for the good of souls. The interesting aspect of that is because in much of Jewish law, the only thing that mattered back then was the public conformity with the law. If you broke the law in private and you were not seen, you didn't give scandal, then there was no culpability. Where, of course, now in Christian law, even thinking wrongly is a crime. It's a violation of the law. I hope that makes sense. That's Canon 9:12. You can look that up. Okay. Am I a libertarian? So I don't know where this came from. Maybe this is the distributism thing. I have two questions. One, Carl wants to ask, am I a libertarian? The other person, his name, I always try to obscure the names of the guilty. This person says, how do you reconcile being a libertarian with being a Catholic? I'm not a libertarian. I'm called a libertarian by people who don't like my arguments. When they find themselves in a debate and they get uncomfortable and their arguments are not effective, they will then begin an attack upon libertarianism. Now, that's called a straw man argument, meaning they will replace the argument with the argument they prefer. And since they're unable or unwilling to argue against what has been said, they argue against something that they can beat up, right? Like you can beat up a straw man. instead of having to actually engage your interlocutor. So I'm not a libertarian. The libertarians would never have me because I believe in a confessional state. What that means is a nation where the government explicitly teaches the Catholic religion as the one true faith, and where the society is ordered to those things. The libertarians would never have me because I don't believe in religious liberty, right? I don't believe that the Satanists should have the same rights to public worship and evangelization as I do Catholics. So this is just the distraction. Now it's true that I do think the libertarians, especially from an economic standpoint, the Austrian component, their analysis is by far the most accurate when you look back at history, and it's certainly the most compatible with the Catholic religion. So that aspect of it, I would agree, and that's probably why people prefer to jump to the their conclusion rather than just dealing with the facts at hand. But no, I am friendly with libertarians, especially those who claim the Christian faith or the Catholic faith. But the vast majority of the people that I run around with would have negative opinions of libertarians, probably because they've just chosen not to examine the individual ideas. They would rather just bash them about with a sledgehammer than engage those thoughts. But that's true on both left and right. So I hope that answers that. Who am I? Just a dad, husband of 26 years, father of 14. My parents are still living. Hope that helps you answer that one. What are my feelings on the stock market? Well, the market is overbought. There are trillions of dollars in free money sloshing around, and so when you give money to bankers and hedge fund traders and so forth, they're not going to just sit on it. They're going to do something with it, and that's what the feds want them to do. They're hoping that by flooding the market with money, there will be a velocity of money effect, and that people will put that money to work. Contrary to what most people think, rich people don't sit on their money. They rarely hoard money. I've known a lot of rich people, some extremely rich people. I've never known them to hoard their money. They always have their money at work in productive assets, businesses, productive land, in equities, in bonds. It's always doing something. This notion of rich people, like putting their money under the mattress and protecting it like some sort of Scrooge, and not wanting it to go to people in need, it's completely false. That is a dialectic that the Marxists use to create class envy, right? They want to stoke division among the classes and get them warring against each other. Truly rich people, they want that money out there working for them, if for no other reason than because they're motivated by greed and they want the money to grow. And it only grows if it's creating value, right? It doesn't grow under your mattress. And these days, even in the bank, the interest doesn't keep up with inflation. So when somebody says something like that, you know that they don't understand economics, or they're motivated by envy, or both. Unfortunately, that group is growing today because we're in this time of change and economic upheaval. And so that's when the Marxists move in and play on those temptations that people have. And they build on the envy, and they build on the ignorance, and they stoke that class envy. That's part of how Marxist revolutionary thought works. That's a long way of answering that. The stock market is certainly overbought, but I would not be shorting it here because we just have no idea the next, Fed's going to pump another $1 trillion in the market. The stock market's going to go up. It has to, because those traders are not going to sit on the cash. So they're going to go buy stocks just because they have to do something with the money. They would be afraid to not do it, right? So if somebody gave you free money, but you had to use it, like Brewster's Millions, but you couldn't spend it on luxury goods, you actually had to invest it, you would do something with it, and that would cause a drop in the supply of that thing, and and you have now a higher demand for it, and that would cause the price to go up. Hope that helps with the stock market. I saw your post in the SSPX group. I'm confused. I thought you were a traditionalist. I wish Emma was here. I don't understand this one. Oh, I bet this is... all right, so here's the story. The SSPX is the priestly fraternity of the Society of St. Pius X. It's a Latin Mass group, for those of you who don't know. Traditionalists, they like the doctrine and the liturgy the way it was before the Second Vatican Council. My son is a clerical member of this order, and I am a moderator of this group. And I posted this morning or last night or something, explaining to people that even though I've been going to the traditional Mass for 20 years, that I miss getting the greater variety of readings and the organization of the lectionary, so that every day of the year has a different reading. So for those of you that are not familiar, in the new Mass of Paul VI, there's a 3-year cycle of readings. And so you hear a reading, you have the Old Testament, and you have the Psalms, and then you have, there's a New Testament reading, and then you have the Gospel reading. And it more or less works that way every day. And so, on Monday, you're going to get a different set of readings than Tuesday and Wednesday and so forth. And then, of course, you have the readings for the saints. In the Old Mass, it didn't work quite that way. There was a 1-year cycle of readings. So you're hearing the same scripture readings over and over again on the same days of the year. There's a little bit of that in the Novus Ordo on some Sundays, feast days, propers like in Lent and Advent and so forth. I'm getting off track, but in the old calendar, it didn't have a 3-year cycle, and ferial days, where there was not an obligatory commemoration of a saint, very oftentimes it's just the same reading from Sunday. So, for example, I follow the traditional calendar. I use the old breviary, and I follow all that stuff. Well, today was an example of a ferial day where it was the same readings for today's Mass as we heard on not only on Sunday, but the other days of this week, I think Monday and Wednesday maybe, that did not have these obligatory commemorations. So I was asking in the SSPX group, hey, am I the only one that kind of thinks that maybe is the only thing good that they got right about the Novus Ordo? Yeah, I think I was the only one. So anyway, somebody called me evil for that, and another person called me a fake traditionalist. So that gives you some insight into that. What is this word? Somebody wants to know, what is neo-ultramontanism? You misspelled it. Neo-ultramontanism. What a great question. Okay, in the Catholic Church, up until the First Vatican Council, which was in the late 19th century, people who were strong proponents, rather people who were zealous proponents of a strong papacy, were called ultramontanists. Ultra, over, montanus, the mountains. This was the Italians referring to people largely that were French, maybe some Swiss, who had this very zealous, vigorous approach to papal power. Some of those people believed that the Pope could do anything, that there was no limit to his power. He was sort of that the role of Vicar of Christ lent him personally some share in the divinity of Christ, such that he was infallible in everything at all times. One cardinal was joked to have overheard the Pope saying that 2 + 2 = 5, and his only way to respond to that was to say, I must have misunderstood your holiness, meaning that even such a simple matter as arithmetic, that the Pope could not be contradicted by the faithful. Now, that uh, that theology, that ecclesiology, was rejected by Vatican I. They put limits on what the Pope's legitimate use of authority was. They defined what the limits of his infallibility were, and they specifically condemned this idea that the Pope could create a new doctrine, for example. And yet nobody reads Vatican I. Nobody cares about that anymore because we have Vatican II, and so for most of the church, anything that came before 1960 is deemed irrelevant. Well, what happened after the council was that this ultramontanism, what happened after the first council, was that this ultramontanism, it kind of continued to grow and infect the church to the point where these days, people, especially folks who converted to Catholicism under JP2, and they came from a Protestant background with a lot of fundamentalism, or Opus Dei is notorious for being ultramontanistic. They've kind of re-energized these condemned theories from before Vatican I, where the Pope can do no wrong. Anything the Pope says and does is true and good, and anybody who resists it is a schismatic. Schism, the Greek word for the tearing. We tend to think of the tearing of the veil in the temple when our Lord died, a separation. All of these theories are false, right? They're not only are they wrong, but they're condemned explicitly by the First Vatican Council. We know that the Pope's infallibility is limited to his defense of the faith, and specifically the defense of the deposit of faith. What that means is the things that the church teaches that came from Christ and were taught by the apostles during their lifetime. Everything that's come since is either from that teaching, maybe better enunciated, better explained, or it's positive canonical law. It's not divine law. But you have a lot of these Catholics running around there, but they thought JP2 was pious and that he was holy, and so anything that he said and did was good, and therefore they've kind of imbued the papacy with that. It's effectively a heresy. Or these people who never gave up on the ultramontanism that was taught at Vatican I. Well, I started using this term neo-ultramontanism to distinguish the old ultramontanism that maybe could have been permitted and taught and believed before it was condemned, with the new ultramontanism, the modern heresy, that says there are no limits to the Pope, right? The Pope can do and say everything he wants. It's all true. It's all binding, and our consciences, we're not allowed to dissent. So everything that Pope Francis says, whether it's about the evils of air conditioning or the merits of socialism or whatever, all of that's binding. We can't, that's all rubbish, right? We're Catholics. We're not ultramontanists. That's a long answer, I'm sorry, but that's the best one I've got. I hope that helps. What is your opinion of a simple Vanguard index fund combo, like a total market fund? I'm not familiar enough with that particular fund. Index funds can be great for people who don't want to be involved, who don't want to buy and sell stocks, who don't really know what they're doing. It's pretty simple. Pick an index fund where net of all fees, they have a history of beating the market, both in bull and bear markets. Look back 10 or 20 years. Vanguard has a pretty good reputation. I don't know about the details, but if you don't want to be involved, net of fees, make sure they beat the market, both in bull and bear markets, and then you've got a great solution, okay? Here's another question about being a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian, I'm a Catholic. Yes, I know that there are some Catholics who proudly proclaim to be libertarians. Tom Woods, as an example. You'd have to ask Tom how he reconciles that. I've not had that question with him. I believe in the sovereignty of Christ and a confessional state, and I don't believe in religious liberty. I'm not welcome in libertarian circles. Why are you giving this talk? What is your purpose? Benjamin, if that's your real name, answering some questions from some friends. What is your credentials? What are your credentials, I think is what you mean. I don't claim to be credentialed. I claim only to have 179 years of parenting experience, 26 years of marriage experience, and a little bit of education. So friends will decide whether or not the time is well spent listening to this. Do I think Francis is trying to give the SSPX faculties, bypassing all the diocesan structures, or do you think he has any aim to formally reconcile them? And what is your opinion of the resistance and Bishop Williamson? No softballs today. Okay, so I think Pope Francis's ecclesiology is such that he thinks that anybody who says they're part of the church is a part of the church. I think he has this so-called subsist mentality where there's a Catholic church and it subsists in various places that is beyond the formal visible structure of the Catholic Church. I think that's true. So when something like the Society of St. Pius X comes up and their canonical situation is irregular, but he knows them from his time in Argentina, and he knows that they're Roman Catholic, and he knows that they have some problems with Vatican II. In his mind, it's like, this is ridiculous. They're Catholic. There's no other way around it. They're in this weird situation. So I think I think that's his attitude. So he told Cardinal Muller, who was at the time the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he told His Eminence to work out a personal prelature with the SSPX. Personal prelature is what the Opus Dei has and what the SSPX wants, which is a worldwide diocese with the right to ordain and discipline priests and erect chapels without diocesan coordination. But of course, what the society also wants is the ability to confirm one of their own to be their bishop and their superior. This is something that's been withheld from the Opus Dei and from a lot of the other traditional mass groups, like the Fraternity of St. Peter, still do not have the bishop that they were promised back in 1988. But I think the Pope was okay with all of that. He's like, yeah, just give them whatever they want. I mean, who cares? From his standpoint, and think about this. The SSPX is 700 priests in the whole world. There are 500,000 priests in the world. So they are effectively 1/8 of 1% of the entire church. He doesn't care about them. To him, it's nothing. So to give them faculties, to give them jurisdiction, he doesn't care about that. So he told Cardinal Muller to get that done. That was going to happen a couple years ago. Bishop Fillet was interested. Most of the society priests were interested. And at the last moment, Cardinal Muller inserted a gotcha clause into the agreement. The clause he inserted into the agreement blew up the whole thing. It was a real bait and switch kind of thing. So they were supposed to get a personal prelature with no conditions, no abjuration of any errors, no promises to say the new mass, no promises to agree to Vatican II. It was just supposed to be just nothing. Just like the excommunications had been lifted without any contingencies, the personal prelature is supposed to happen the same way. Well, Cardinal Muller inserted these phrases that said you'll accept Vatican II, you'll make a updated vow of obedience to the Pope that had all sorts of problematic language, kind of the ultramontanistic stuff that we talked about earlier. And he knew that by doing that, he would blow it up. And of course, the society got this and said, what are you trying to play here? And they abandoned the talks. Whether that had anything to do with the fact that the Pope then summarily fired Cardinal Muller? I don't know. That would be speculation. What I've relayed to you from people who are in a position to know is what happened. So, Shane, to get to your question, after that thing was blown up, the Pope did this extraordinary thing of giving them faculties and giving them jurisdiction without any dependency upon bishops, and then giving the bishops the instruction, not the preference, not the choice, but the instruction to cooperate with the SSPX on marriages. This has been a sticking point for some bishops who are now basically in schism with the Pope because they refuse to obey on that regard, leaving the SSPX to have to do the marriages on their own like they always have been. So they're creating they're widening the modernist schism that exists with these people. Shane, I hope that helps. All right, I think I've now answered most of these questions. I'm sorry if I've missed them, but I've been talking longer than normal, and I hope that you find that these have been helpful in some way in your life. God bless. Have a great day.